On Grandpa's birthday, everyone was laughing and dancing in the big, decorated living room. Balloons floated near the ceiling, and the smell of fried chicken and pie filled the air. Music played softly in the background, but I couldn't bring myself to join. Something felt off. While everyone else was cheering and taking pictures, I quietly slipped away from the crowd. I walked down the narrow hallway to Grandpa Franklin's study, where the soft light from his desk lamp glowed against the old wooden walls. He looked up from his papers, his eyes brightening when he saw me. "Hannah," he said, a warm smile spreading across his face. "I'm glad you're here." I smiled back, feeling the tension in my chest ease just a little. I could hear the muffled laughter and chatter of the party behind the closed door, but in here, it was calm. Grandpa's voice, low and steady, filled the room. We talked about small things, his garden, the new books he had been reading, but I could see the weight on his shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly when he picked up his coffee cup. I poured myself a cup of tea and handed him one as well. "You don't seem happy tonight," I said softly, sitting across from him. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I love seeing the family together, Hannah," he said, "but sometimes it feels like they care more about the celebration than about me." His words stung, and I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would fix it, but I knew there was nothing I could say to make them see what I saw. I watched him quietly, noticing the small details I had never paid attention to before, the way he fiddled with the cuff of his sleeve, the slight crease between his eyebrows, the tiredness in his eyes. These were signs of a man who had given so much of himself, only to feel overlooked. I realized then that staying here wasn't just about avoiding the noise of the party. It was about being here for him, showing him that someone truly cared. Minutes passed, and I could still hear the faint hum of music and laughter through the walls. I knew my decision to stay behind would make others think I was missing out, but it felt right. Grandpa and I shared quiet conversations, and I listened as he talked about memories I had never heard before, stories from his childhood, lessons learned the hard way, moments of joy and regret. I felt closer to him in those moments than I ever had in the crowded living room. As I sat there, I started to sense the undercurrents swirling around the party. The smiles and laughter upstairs seemed lighter than they should, forced in some places, distracted in others. Something told me that beneath the surface of this celebration, not everyone was as kind or loyal as they appeared. And that thought made my heart tighten. Whatever was happening tonight, I knew that this quiet moment with Grandpa might be the only truth in the room. I poured another cup of tea, determined to listen, to watch, and to understand, because I had a feeling that what I saw tonight would change everything. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the party drifted through the hall as I stepped back into the living room to grab a drink for Grandpa. That's when I noticed Derek, my cousin, leaning close to Aunt Claire near the buffet table. His usual charming smile was there, but something in his eyes made my stomach turn. I slowed down, pretending to adjust the plates, and listened without meaning to, but the words reached me clearly. "Honestly, Hannah doesn't need to know," Derek whispered, his voice low but confident. "Grandpa's assets? We can handle it ourselves. She's too sentimental. She wouldn't even fight for it." Claire giggled softly, her eyes scanning the room as if to make sure no one was listening. "Exactly. She's so loyal and sweet, always helping everyone else. She'll never suspect a thing." My hands froze around the tray of drinks. I could feel my chest tighten as I realized what they were saying. Excluding me from Grandpa's will? Planning to take advantage of him while pretending everything was fine? The betrayal hit harder than I expected. I had always trusted family, believed they cared about Grandpa as much as I did, and now I saw the cracks beneath their smiles. Derek leaned closer, dropping his voice even further. "We just need to make sure he doesn't get any ideas. He likes to talk, you know, but we'll manage him. It's only a matter of time." They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that chills the blood because it's meant to hurt someone else. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my face calm, my body still. Part of me wanted to march over and demand an explanation, to shout that I had heard every word. But another part knew better. This wasn't a fight I could win by anger. Not yet. Instead, I stayed still, pretending to tidy the table while my mind raced. Every smile they shared now seemed fake, every word they said to Grandpa earlier suddenly tainted. I realized just how cleverly they thought they could hide their greed. They underestimated me, assumed I was naive, assumed I wouldn't notice. I put the drinks down and stepped back, taking a deep breath. I couldn't let them see me reacting. Any sign of anger or hurt would alert them, make them more cautious. I needed to observe, to understand exactly what they were planning before I acted. So I stayed quiet, watching them from a distance, noting every glance, every whispered word. Derek's charm, Claire's giggle, it all felt rehearsed now, part of their plan. And as I moved away to serve Grandpa, my heart ached with the weight of the betrayal. I felt the sting of knowing that even family could be so cunning, so willing to put greed over love. Yet beneath that ache, something else stirred, a sense of determination. If they thought I wouldn't notice, they were wrong. I would stay calm, I would watch, and I would wait. Because the night had shown me their true colors, and I was already thinking of how to make sure those colors couldn't hide forever. I returned to Grandpa's study, closing the door gently behind me. The soft light from his desk lamp cast a warm glow across the room, and the quiet felt comforting after the chaos of the party. Grandpa Franklin looked up from his papers, a small smile greeting me. "Glad you came back," he said softly. I set down the drinks and sat across from him. "I couldn't leave you alone," I replied. He chuckled lightly but then leaned back, his expression growing serious. "Hannah, sometimes I wonder if they really care about me," he said, his voice low. "Derek and Claire, they're always smiling, always saying the right things, but I can feel it. They think only about what they can get, not about what's right." I reached across the desk, placing my hand over his. "Grandpa, I see it too," I said gently. "I know they don't always have your best interests at heart. But you're not alone. I'll look out for you. Always." He sighed, a mix of relief and sadness in his eyes. "You've always been different, Hannah. You notice things others don't. You care about people in a way that's rare." I smiled, feeling a surge of warmth at his words. It made the ache from the party and the family's betrayal feel a little lighter, knowing I was here for him. We talked for a while, about small things, his garden, the books he had been reading, memories from my childhood, but underneath it all, I sensed him opening up. He spoke cautiously about the party, about the way Derek and Claire moved and talked, the things they didn't say but left hanging in the air. His trust in me grew with every word, and I felt a responsibility settle on my shoulders. "I worry," he admitted quietly, "that some of them only see me as a way to get something. I want to believe they love me, but I'm not sure anymore." His eyes looked heavy, tired from years of giving so much and feeling overlooked. "You have nothing to worry about with me," I said firmly. "I'll make sure nothing happens that would hurt you. You've always protected us, taught us right from wrong, and now it's my turn. I promise." He smiled, this time more genuinely, the tension in his face softening. "I'm lucky to have you, Hannah," he said. The simple words carried a weight that made my heart tighten. I knew why I needed to stay strong, why I needed to act carefully. Protecting him wasn't just about love, it was about justice. As we continued to talk, I felt our bond grow stronger. Every shared memory, every quiet laugh, every serious confession built a connection that anchored me. This bond gave me clarity, a purpose I hadn't fully understood before tonight. I realized that whatever Derek and Claire were planning, I couldn't let them succeed. Not against Grandpa. Not against the love and trust he had placed in me. When I finally left the study to check on the party again, I carried with me a quiet determination. Protecting Grandpa meant watching, learning, and preparing. And deep down, I knew that one day, I would make sure the people who had tried to betray him, and me, paid for their greed. The next morning, the house was quiet, but the tension from the night before hadn't left. Grandpa sat at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of him, and I noticed the tight line of his mouth and the way his fingers drummed nervously against the wood. Something was wrong. "Morning, Grandpa," I said softly, pouring him a cup of coffee. He gave a small nod, but his eyes didn't meet mine. I could tell he was carrying a heavy weight. Later, I learned from a casual comment he made that Derek had convinced him to sign a few documents the night before, saying it was all part of a plan to keep the family united and celebrate together. They said it's just to make things simpler, he said quietly, his voice heavy with doubt. I guess I wanted to trust them. My heart sank. What I had overheard at the party wasn't just idle talk. Derek had taken action, manipulating Grandpa into giving access to accounts and finances without realizing the consequences. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. My chest tightened, and anger bubbled under the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. I watched Grandpa throughout the day, noticing the subtle signs of stress, how he avoided looking at certain papers, how he hesitated when he answered questions, how the spark in his eyes seemed dimmer. I wanted to confront Derek and Claire immediately, to demand answers, but I knew that acting on impulse would only backfire. This needed a plan. I sat with Grandpa again in the study, gently guiding him to talk about his feelings. You don't have to handle everything alone, I said. I'll help you figure this out. We can take it step by step. He gave me a tired smile but nodded, appreciating my support. I realized then that my moral compass and sense of right and wrong were colliding with the need for justice. I didn't want to hurt anyone unnecessarily, but I also couldn't let Derek and Claire take advantage of Grandpa. Protecting him meant being careful, patient, and strategic. I spent the afternoon quietly observing Derek and Claire. Their smiles at breakfast were too bright, too practiced, as if nothing had happened. Every movement they made, every word they said, now carried a hidden meaning I couldn't ignore. They thought I hadn't noticed, that I would remain passive. But I had noticed. Every small detail, every slip, every false word was a clue. I knew I needed time to understand exactly what they were planning and how far their greed would go. Confronting them now would only alert them, making them more careful and harder to stop. So I stayed quiet, keeping my observations close and my emotions controlled. Inside, the fire of anger and the need for justice burned brightly. I promised myself that I would protect Grandpa, and I would make sure Derek and Claire couldn't manipulate or hurt him again. The betrayal had deepened, but so had my determination, and I knew the next steps needed to be smart, careful, and decisive. That afternoon, I stayed in Grandpa's study, helping him sort through old papers and files. It was dusty work, but I didn't mind. As I flipped through envelopes and notebooks, one small, yellowed envelope caught my eye. It wasn't labeled, just tucked between a pile of old letters. I opened it carefully and found a neatly folded letter in Grandpa's handwriting. The first lines made my chest tighten. He wrote about his disappointment with certain family members, about how some people valued money more than love. It saddens me to see how easily loyalty can be replaced by greed, he had written. Reading it, I felt a mix of sorrow and anger. The betrayal I had sensed at the party and confirmed the next day now had a deeper meaning. Grandpa had known, all along, that not everyone in the family cared about him for the right reasons. But as I read further, my sadness turned to sharp focus. The letter mentioned something else, something I hadn't expected. Grandpa had hidden some assets in his name, accounts, and properties that Derek and Claire didn't know about. He had taken steps quietly over the years to protect part of his life from the people who might try to take advantage of him. The realization hit me like a jolt. This wasn't just about protecting him emotionally anymore. There was a way to fight back, to make sure Derek and Claire couldn't profit from their lies and scheming. I carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope, my mind racing with possibilities. I felt the weight of responsibility, but also a sense of clarity I hadn't had before. Revenge didn't need to be reckless or angry. It could be quiet, clever, and effective. Every move would need to be calculated, every word measured, but I now had an advantage that no one in the family suspected. Grandpa glanced up from a stack of papers and smiled faintly. "Finding anything interesting?" he asked. I shook my head, keeping the letter hidden for now. "Just helping you sort things," I said softly. Inside, I felt a surge of determination. I would protect him, not only from their attempts to take his money but from the kind of betrayal that hurts the heart. I spent the next hour continuing to organize documents, pretending to focus on filing, but mentally planning the steps I would take. Derek and Claire had assumed that greed and charm would be enough to blind everyone, but they had underestimated me. They didn't know I had seen, heard, and now had the tools to counteract them. By the time I finished helping Grandpa, my resolve had strengthened. I wasn't just angry or hurt anymore, I was ready to act. Revenge would not be loud or messy. It would be strategic, precise, and fair. Derek and Claire would get what they deserved, but on my terms. For the first time since the party began, I felt a sense of control. I looked at Grandpa, who was quietly arranging his papers, and promised myself that I would protect him, honor his wishes, and make sure that anyone who tried to betray him would regret underestimating me. Today had shown me that betrayal could be turned into opportunity, and I was ready to take it. After discovering Grandpa's hidden letter, I knew I couldn't act impulsively. Revenge needed a plan, and patience was my greatest weapon. I spent the next few days quietly researching estate laws and financial accounts, reading through old documents, and learning the best ways to protect Grandpa without alerting Derek and Claire. I wanted to make sure every step I took would be careful and effective. I also looked into family history, trying to understand patterns of behavior and where Derek and Claire's greed had roots. It was clear they had always been willing to put their own gain above anyone else's happiness, and that made them predictable. I made notes, keeping them hidden in a small notebook in my bag, knowing that knowledge would be power when the time came to act. Next, I reached out discreetly to Lucas Bennett, a family lawyer I trusted. Lucas had worked with Grandpa on minor legal matters before, and I knew he could guide me without tipping anyone off. We met quietly, going over the documents and discussing the best approach to protect Grandpa's assets. Lucas reassured me that with careful planning, we could ensure Derek and Claire wouldn't succeed. The meeting gave me confidence. I wasn't alone in this. Meanwhile, I started subtly planting seeds among other relatives. During casual conversations at small family gatherings, I would mention small truths about financial responsibility, about honesty and loyalty, and sometimes hint at discrepancies without revealing too much. I could see Derek's face tighten when I said certain things, and Claire's polite smile faltered slightly when I laughed at a remark about fairness. They didn't know I was careful, but I was slowly exposing their true colors in front of others. Every day, I observed more, listened more, and planned more. I stayed calm even when frustration bubbled inside me. It was difficult to watch them continue their charade while knowing what they were capable of, but I understood that patience was necessary. If I acted too soon, they would cover their tracks, and Grandpa would remain vulnerable. The quiet strategy felt empowering. I no longer felt helpless or angry in the moment. Instead, I felt focused and determined. Each conversation I guided, each document I reviewed, and each plan I discussed with Lucas was a step toward justice. By the end of the week, I realized that the betrayal I had uncovered wasn't just about money, it was about trust, and I was slowly reclaiming it for Grandpa. The family might still be blind to the truth, but I was ready. Derek and Claire would eventually show their greed to everyone in plain sight, and when they did, I would be ready to act. For now, I watched, I planned, and I waited, letting patience and strategy guide me. I understood that revenge didn't need to be loud or vengeful, it needed to be clever and controlled. And that's exactly what I intended it to be. By the following week, I was ready to make my first careful moves. I didn't rush or confront anyone directly. Instead, I started dropping small, true hints to other family members about Derek's handling of Grandpa's savings. I mentioned casually, during quiet conversations with uncles and aunts, things like, "I was surprised to see some accounts low recently, I hope Grandpa hasn't been stressed about it." The words were subtle, but they planted doubt. I watched as Derek and Claire began to shift. At breakfast, Derek's usual confident smile was forced, his eyes darting more than usual. Claire tried to cover with her polite laughter, but there was tension in her voice. Small missteps began to appear, whispered arguments behind closed doors, sudden changes in demeanor, and sharp glances whenever I entered a room. I stayed calm, pretending to be unaware, letting their paranoia build on its own. It was satisfying, in a quiet, controlled way, to see the effect of careful observation and subtle revelation. Family members started asking innocent questions about accounts and finances, not knowing I had guided their curiosity. Derek and Claire tried to reassure them, but the seeds of doubt were already growing. I stayed in the background, letting the family notice the cracks, without exposing myself as the source. Grandpa, meanwhile, began to notice the shift. During our quiet talks in the study, he mentioned he could see the change in Derek and Claire. "You've grown stronger, Hannah," he said softly one afternoon, his eyes full of pride. "You're not just standing by, you're protecting what's right." Hearing him say that reinforced my determination. I wasn't doing this out of anger or revenge alone, I was doing it because it was the right thing for him, for fairness, and for justice. I carefully planned each conversation, each remark, and each observation to maintain the illusion that I wasn't involved. The tension in the house grew, but no one suspected me. Derek's voice was sharper at family dinners, Claire's laughter more forced. I saw them glance at each other with unease, unsure of who might know the truth. Every small slip, every nervous gesture confirmed that my approach was working. At the same time, I maintained normal interactions with Grandpa, making sure he felt safe and valued. His pride in my calm and careful handling of the situation made me realize how important it was to act with patience and intelligence, not impulsiveness. I didn't need dramatic confrontations yet, the slow unraveling of their plans would do the work for me. By the end of the week, I could see that my first moves had shaken Derek and Claire more than I expected. They were nervous, second-guessing themselves, and the family was beginning to notice inconsistencies without suspecting my role. I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that patience, careful planning, and subtle truth could achieve more than anger ever could. Grandpa's eyes sparkled with quiet pride each time we talked, reminding me that I wasn't just seeking revenge, I was protecting him, and that made every calculated step worth it. A few days later, I decided it was time for the next step. I suggested a small family gathering at Grandpa's house, framing it as a casual get-together to enjoy some tea and talk about old memories. Everyone agreed, thinking it would be simple and relaxed. Derek and Claire smiled, confident as always, not knowing what I had planned. Once we were all settled in the living room, I took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "I wanted us to have a quiet afternoon together," I began, "and while we're here, I think it's important to be honest with each other." The room fell silent. I could see Derek's eyes narrow and Claire's smile falter, but I stayed composed. "I've learned a lot recently," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "I've gone through some records and documents, and I know about Derek's handling of Grandpa's accounts." I held up a folder containing evidence of transfers and irregularities that Derek had tried to hide. "I've also seen Claire's lies, covering up for him and misleading others in the family. The truth is all here, and it can't be ignored." Derek's face turned red with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Claire tried to intervene, speaking quickly and nervously. "Hannah, this isn't fair. You're twisting things." I raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I'm not twisting anything. These are facts. They are not opinions, and they are not rumors. They are documented and verifiable. Grandpa deserves honesty, and the family deserves to see the truth clearly." Other relatives looked shocked, whispering among themselves. Derek's voice grew louder, more desperate, but it only made the evidence more undeniable. Claire tried to manipulate the story, suggesting I had misread things, but I calmly pointed out the facts and the records. There was no denying what had been done. Grandpa watched quietly from his chair, his expression a mix of sadness and pride. I felt his hand brush against mine under the table, a small but grounding reminder that I was on the right side. My goal was never to humiliate anyone unnecessarily, it was to protect him and ensure justice was served. The room remained tense as Derek and Claire's schemes were fully exposed. The laughter, smiles, and casual conversations of the past weeks had disappeared, replaced by the reality of their actions. Other family members looked at them differently now, some shaking their heads, others whispering quietly to one another. I stayed composed throughout, refusing to let anger dictate my actions. By the end of the afternoon, the betrayal had been revealed completely, and Derek and Claire had no defense left. They were left to face the consequences of their own choices, and I knew Grandpa's interests were finally safe. For the first time since the party began, the house felt calmer. I had achieved what I needed without cruelty or rash decisions. Justice had been done, and I had maintained control and dignity, proving that patience, careful planning, and calm determination could overcome even the deepest betrayals. After the confrontation, the house felt different, quieter, but lighter. Grandpa Franklin called me into his study one afternoon, a gentle smile on his face. "Hannah," he said, his voice warm, "I don't know what I would have done without you. You've protected not just my legacy, but my dignity. I'm proud of you." Hearing those words, I felt a rush of relief and pride. All the careful planning, the patience, and the quiet observation had led to this moment. I had stayed true to my instincts, and it had made a real difference. I didn't need anyone else to recognize my efforts. Grandpa's trust and pride were enough, but it was comforting to see that the family was beginning to understand, too. Derek and Claire's reactions grew increasingly tense as the legal consequences of their actions became clear. Their access to Grandpa's inheritance was blocked, and formal measures ensured that they could no longer manipulate accounts or property. They tried to argue and protest, but everything had been documented and verified. There was no room for denial or excuses. Their plans had completely unraveled. Other family members, some of whom had been neutral or unsure of where they stood, began to show recognition for what I had done. Cousins who had once overlooked me in favor of Derek and Claire came forward quietly, expressing admiration for the way I had handled the situation. Even some aunts and uncles, who had remained distant, nodded in acknowledgement. It was clear that my calm and thoughtful approach had earned respect without needing to boast or draw attention to myself. Grandpa and I spent more time together after that, sharing quiet conversations, reminiscing, and enjoying the peace that had finally settled in the house. He would occasionally glance at me with a small, satisfied smile, and I knew he understood how much effort and care had gone into protecting him. I didn't just safeguard finances, I had restored a sense of trust and stability in the family that Derek and Claire had tried to destroy. Emotionally, it felt like a weight had lifted. I had confronted betrayal not with anger or rashness, but with intelligence and patience. My loyalty had been tested, and I had proven that it mattered more than greed or deceit. I felt stronger, more confident in my ability to face difficult situations while staying true to my values. Even as Derek and Claire fumed over their failures, I felt a quiet satisfaction. They had underestimated me, and it had cost them dearly. But I didn't gloat or celebrate. The victory was in seeing Grandpa safe, the family aware of the truth, and justice quietly served. In the end, I realized that loyalty, intelligence, and careful action could overcome manipulation and greed. The experience had tested me in ways I never imagined, but it had also shown me the strength of love, patience, and perseverance. Grandpa's legacy was secure, and I had proven, both to myself and to the family, that doing what is right always matters more than giving in to betrayal. After the chaos with Derek and Claire had settled, Grandpa and I decided to create something new for the family, a small tradition just for us. Every Sunday, we would sit together over tea, sharing stories, memories, and lessons from our lives. It wasn't about gifts or parties anymore. It was about trust, honesty, and being there for each other. Slowly, other family members began to join in, not out of obligation, but because they appreciated the sincerity of these moments. I often found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past weeks. The betrayal, the secrets, the careful planning, it had all taken an emotional toll, but it also taught me valuable lessons. I realized that betrayal doesn't have to break you. It doesn't have to leave you defeated or angry forever. Instead, it can show you who truly values you, who can be trusted, and what kind of strength you carry inside yourself. I thought about Derek and Claire, their charm and confidence now exposed as selfishness and greed. But I also thought about myself, how I had stayed patient, observed carefully, and acted with thought instead of anger. That approach had made all the difference. Justice wasn't about shouting or getting even, it was about timing, intelligence, and quiet perseverance. I had proven that loyalty and careful action could overcome even the strongest manipulation. Grandpa would often look at me with pride in his eyes during our Sundays together. "You've grown into a strong, thoughtful woman," he'd say. "Not just brave, but wise." Those words meant more to me than any recognition from the rest of the family. I had regained control over our family's future and, more importantly, I had protected someone I loved. Even now, I could feel a subtle change in myself. The experience had strengthened me in ways I didn't expect. I was more independent, more aware, and more capable of handling challenges without losing my sense of who I am. I understood now that life would always test your loyalty, patience, and judgment, but facing those tests carefully could shape you into someone stronger, not bitter. The house, once filled with tension and quiet manipulation, now felt lighter. The Sundays with Grandpa reminded me that honesty and care could heal wounds left by betrayal. I knew Derek and Claire would continue with their lives, but their influence over our family was gone. What remained was a sense of peace, respect, and a clearer understanding of who truly mattered. As I looked ahead, I felt ready for whatever challenges life might bring. The lessons of betrayal and patience were etched into me, shaping the person I had become. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was stronger, wiser, and capable of protecting the people and values that mattered most. The past had tested me, but it had also given me clarity. And with that clarity, I knew I could face the future with confidence, independence, and a steady heart.